we've known them their whole lives. Oh, there's an earthquake going on here. So remember I told you before, sometimes things happen. Honestly, there's an earthquake. Okay. Weird. Anyway, she would toggle between, what do they know? Why would they do this? Why would they be so disloyal? And I'm like, Mom, these are her friends. They care about her. Then she'd call back and be contrite. Well, of course they know. Of course they want to help. What can we do? Oh, your father's going to blame this all on me.
Welcome to Old God Talks to Me, a podcast dedicated to helping guys create kick-ass lives for themselves and those that they love. Ladies, if you want to know what your guy is thinking, this podcast is for women too. Each week, a special guest helps you create that life you've imagined. We talk anti-aging medicine, personal growth, relationships and hot sex. Yeah, you hear me, getting laid more frequently. Other guy vices, and topics that many don't want to talk about but need to. Just because you're getting older doesn't mean you have to be old. Don't want to miss anything? Be sure to subscribe, share, rate, and review this podcast. And be sure to go to www.thestandard.academy/magazine and grab a free copy of our new digital magazine, The Standard Academy, where we talk about erogenous zones, growing hair back, and other things that will help you create that kick-ass life. Now get ready to listen up and share with friends.
This is Orest, the official old guy at oldguytalkstome.com, a podcast dedicated to helping older guys create kick-ass lives for themselves and those that they love. Not older guys, just guys in general. And today I have a special guest, and we're going to be talking about something that plagues a lot of families, addiction. That's right, addiction. And my guest today is Michaela Kelley Canterbury. She's a lawyer and writer. She obtained her JD at Gonzaga University School of Law in Spokane, Washington, and graduated from Duquesne University of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, with a BA in political science and a minor in philosophy. Michaela is licensed to practice law in Alaska and is owner, operator, and lead trial lawyer at Kelley and Canterbury, LLC, where she works with her husband, Christopher, partner in all things. Michaela resides in Eagle River, Alaska with Christopher, where they raise their son, daughter, and dogs in the same valley and woods where she was raised. She's the author of a book called Sister Siren, a nonfiction about addiction and a field guide about how to love an addict. Welcome, Michaela.
Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Oh, you just call me Orest. No,
Thank you, Orest.
I'm not a doctor anymore. I gave that up. So tell us a little bit about how you grew up, your family, and your relationships with your sister and parents and all that.
Sure. Yeah. So I was raised in Alaska, and my sister is 13 years younger than I am. So there's like a generation and a half between us, you know.
Sure.
So
okay.
When my parents had my sister, or when we, the family, when she came to the family, they had a built-in babysitter, you know.
Okay.
And I was at this like teenage age where, you know, I'm like a really cool sub-parent, you know, so I often babysat her. And when I got my driver's license, I'd pick her up from preschool. And, you know, she was always at the, you know, I was a cheerleader in high school. So she'd come to the games and do her thing. And she was always in the center of the slumber parties with my girlfriends, you know. So it was, you know, it was a unique sibling relationship because I was so much older.
So I have to ask you the obvious question because I go places people don't normally go. Was this kind of a surprise child? Like someone forgot to make a trip to a drugstore or something? Or
you know, it was a desired child.
Was it? Okay.
Yes, my mother had an ectopic pregnancy, and they had to remove one of her a tube. They had to remove a tube, and they told her then that she wouldn't be able to have kids and any more kids. And my parents wanted more kids. My dad's the oldest of 9, and so I mean, kids are kids, and we, you know, everybody loves kids. Anywho, So we were, when the doctors said mom couldn't have any more kids, we were actually, as a family, talking about adopting. But, you know, my parents proved those doctors wrong.
Yeah.
And then Kaylin came along, my younger sister. She was born on Christmas Eve. And so we call it like the best Christmas gift ever.
Cool, cool. So you had this you're actually like a second parent, or you're also like a second parent, or almost like two only kids in the same family.
Exactly. You know, I was an only child for like 13 years, and then she comes along and I'm like, okay, I'm a babysitter for life now. No one told me that was the deal. But then when I went off to college and law school and, you know, that stuff, then she was an only child, you know?
Right.
And so I was, our relationship, I was like sissy on the phone, you know, and then she would see me I would be home, of course, in the summers when I would come home to Alaska and work and make money, you know, your summer college money and stuff like that.
Sure, sure. So you maintained a relationship with your sister.
Yeah.
And so when did the addiction start and what was it?
Yeah, good question. When did the addiction start? You know, in writing the book, I kind of went back to figure out how this happened, because I didn't know how it happened. We're a family of high functioning professionals. I'm a trial lawyer. My dad is a retired trial lawyer. My mom's a PhD. My sister has a master's in counseling. My husband's a trial lawyer. We got kids that are elite athletes, and my sister was a college athlete. So this was happening under all of our noses. We did not know. Like, she's getting good grades, she's performing at a high level athletically. So we didn't know. So when I go back and I kind of till, you know, the 30 plus years of everything, there was a moment in time when she was 13-ish, and she was a speed skater in the Arctic Winter Games, and she lost an edge and broke her ankle. She went feet first into the boards and broke her ankle. And this was in Canada. And they gave her doxycodone, hydrocodone at that young age. And we're in a foreign country, even though we're from Alaska, which we basically feel like we're Alaskanadians, you know, it's still considered a foreign country and different medical situation than in the United States. And so shortly after that, my sister was assessed with ADHD. And so this is like in the 80s, you know, 80s, 90s timeframe, and late 80s, early 90s timeframe. And so then there was medication for that. And my theory is that her body, mind, and spirit began to learn to depend upon medication and things outside of herself to relieve from suffering. And so that's where I think it started, because it's, you know, and then it just went from there, you know?
Yeah. Michaela, I'm a little bit, how should I say? I have this thing about ADHD and some of these other things about whether it is actually as prevalent as people are being labeled they are. Because I think it's a big issue with boys. If you're an extrovert, there's a good chance you're going to get labeled ADHD. Oh, sure. She was high functioning, but yet somebody decided to label her as, what was the point of the medications, the ADHD? If she was high functioning, what was the point of those medications?
Oh, exactly. I feel you. This was the time that I'm away at school. And so my parents are doing what the doctors are telling them to do. Oh, so they're following doctors' orders. And it wasn't that, and my parents are of a generation, this is my opinion.
They're probably of my generation. How old are your parents?
My dad is 77 and my mom's 76.
Okay, I'm 70.
Yeah, and I mean, there's respect for doctors, and I mean, my dad was a trial lawyer, so he would question doctors because we had to,
Right.
But when you're serving your children and your family, they're trusting the doctors, and they're following what they say because this is their skill set. And so, there were what my mom would say were behavior issues, like my sister would get in fights at school, or yeah, that was a big one that I remember. And so I think with those kinds of reports from the school, that my sister is, being my sister, she's a fierce little scrappy person, she's a fierce little scrappy fighter person. I mean, if you're bullying somebody, my sister's going to step up for you, and that's just the kind of person that she is. Anywho, I'm not disagreeing with your pushback or like discernment about what's ADHD. And back in the day when this was happening, it was this newer thing. Now it's like those kinds of diagnoses are I'll say well accepted without investigation as to if you're putting your young people on medication, what are going to be the consequences. When this was happening with my sister, that analysis was not happening. This was like
it was brand new. No one knew what it was. No one knew what the side effects were going to be.
Exactly. And basically those Ritalins and all those are basically meth light. And so her addiction, I mean, like I said, her body, mind, and spirit learned to depend upon medication to get her through whatever suffering there was, and through the course of being a college athlete, a high school athlete, all those, there's still those medications going on, and then there weren't reassessments for the ADHD that she was diagnosed with and its interplay with the oxys and the hydros that were also being given to her for various sporting injuries. So it really laid the groundwork for this addiction to become fierce in her life. And it got to, I mean, and again, we didn't know we didn't know because she was high functioning until she couldn't. And it got to a point where she was losing jobs. She ultimately became homeless. Things were, and she was on the streets and homeless.
Yeah. So, not that I'm an expert in this, but so she was out of college already, correct?
Yeah, she went to graduate school.
Okay. She went to graduate school, and she had gotten jobs, but she was losing jobs, and my suspicion is someone they don't move out of a house and be on the street. There's usually you get the house, you go into an apartment, you go into your car gets repossessed, and then you end up in the street. I think that's probably a progression. So what was her, how did that manifest? And were you back home at that point? Was this happening in Alaska, or was this happening somewhere else?
Yes, this was happening in Alaska. So she got married. And they, my sister and her husband, my brother-in-law at the time, so they were doing their schooling in Washington State, and they returned to Alaska. Still high functioning. I mean, he's captain of the men's soccer team, and she was captain of the women's soccer team. I mean, she was even considering going to like I forget the name. I want to say it's called the Seattle Sounders, but the women's soccer team. Like she was like invited to try out, and she chose to go pursue her education. Anywho, they both got master's degrees and returned to Alaska, and were married and got an apartment and were doing their things, working. They were each working, having jobs. And then things started becoming overwhelming for them, and they couldn't keep up with normal bills. And but there was always like an excuse for it, that made sense, until
Mhm.
it didn't make sense. Um, like somebody stole their rent money. I'm like, well, call the cops, But if you're making drugs in your house, you can't very well call the cops. Of course, I didn't know that because I didn't know anything about drugs. I'm not a drug dealer.
So was the husband also was into drugs too? Obviously, they were
Yeah.
both into it.
Sadly, his family was struggling with alcoholism, and so they were but both my sister and her husband were addicts.
Do you need accountability? Are you looking to change the course of your life but have failed to keep on track? Too often we take in information and fail to act. Do you need an accountability program to stay the course? Then go to www.thestandard.academy and find out about my accountability program that goes with my course that helps you find out what you want, why you want it, and how to get it. The accountability program keeps you on track to get results.
Mhm. Okay. And also selling drugs and making drugs and things like that.
I heard that
Uh-huh.
my brother-in-law at the time was selling drugs. Yeah. And
Okay.
making them. Yeah.
So how do you and your family react to that knowledge?
Well, not well. I mean, how it came, it was just my sister's soul sister girlfriends that she's known since elementary school. Again, we're from a small town here in Alaska.
Mm-hmm.
One of them reached out to me on a social media platform, Messenger, and just said, hey, it was really vague. It was like, hey, I'm in town. I love hearing about your kids. Maybe we can get together while I'm in town. By the way, what's your parents' phone number? And I'm like, oh, okay. And so when I get reach outs like that, I'm like, okay, they either have a question about the law. That usually happens to me. People will call me about the law, or, so I responded back. And then no sooner do I respond back, my mother calls me up and tells me that, hey, my sister's friends came to the house and sat in the living room and told me that your sister does drugs and her husband is giving them to her. And I'm like, and that's how I received the information, and that's how my mother received the information. And my father at the time, he was fishing or hunting. he's an outdoorsman, so this was in the summer, so he wasn't he was like fishing, I believe. And my mom and I just kind of struggled with that, and I sat with it, and I said, I'll be there and we will share this information with Dad. And that's what we did. And it wasn't easy, Orest. I mean, my mother, now we know my mother is in the late stages of Alzheimer's right now.
Mm-hmm.
And we have suspicions, our family has suspicions that at the time that this was happening, the beginnings of it were
Mm-hmm.
occurring. And we couldn't pinpoint that because of the dramatic presentation that was happening with my sister, right?
Sure.
And so when my mother would call, she would toggle between not believing my sister's friends. And I'd be like, what the heck? We've known them their whole lives. Oh, there's an earthquake going on here. So remember I told you before, sometimes things happen. Honestly, there's an earthquake. Okay. Weird. Anyway, she would toggle between, what do they know? Why would they do this? Why would they be those so disloyal? And I'm like, Mom, these are her friends. They care about her. Then she'd call back and be contrite. Well, of course they know. Of course they want to help. What can we do? Oh, your father's going to blame this all on me. and so it was this weird thing that and then I had to, call my husband and I mean, we had 2 kids that are teenagers, and how are we going to talk with our teenage kids about this? And then how are we going to step in with dad, and what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And so I then had a conversation with my husband. He and my son were traveling. And of course, your mind immediately goes to how many times were our teenage kids at their apartment and they were doing drugs, or there was drug paraphernalia around, or God, do they sell to my kids' friends? All these things. I'm getting truth bumps as I talk about it, and I'm getting shallow in my voice because it scared me so much. It scared me so very much that this was happening, and I didn't know what to do. And I just have the best husband on the planet that's just, our kids can't go there anymore. We're going to start with the basics. Our kids can't go there
Sure.
anymore.
Yeah.
And we're going to share with our children, auntie and uncle have a problem, and we're figuring out how we're going to navigate this. And when we have more information, we'll figure that out. And then I stepped into, going to my parents' house and sitting down with my mom and dad and sharing with my dad. And initially, Orest, it was my parents started blaming each other, quite frankly. It was a big fight about whose fault this was. And I didn't know if our family was going to be able to make it, because everybody was going to be pointing fingers at each other rather than trying to problem solve and step in here. So anyway, how we react is kind of a deep, question.
So
involved there, but
so Michaela,
yeah.
So when did you confront your sister and her husband, or how did that go?
Yeah, again, not well. So
of course it wouldn't. I mean, would you expect? Oh, I'm glad you're confronting me about my addiction. Yeah, I'm so happy. Thank you.
Right. Well, the first thing is that my mother is a PhD and a counselor, and was head of her department at the University of Alaska in the Human Services Department. So the first thing she does is she goes mama bear, and she's going to fix my sister. So she confronts, I'll put that in air quotes, I'm going to say she does her own intervention, thinking that she's going to save my sister. Okay. And so my mom is like meeting with her on the stoop of their apartment, because my sister would never invite us in. Why? Now we know she was doing drugs. That's why, My mom would always call and say, oh, she's trying and she's sick today. Keep her in your prayers. And now I know she was dope sick. I didn't know at the time. So I'm making her chicken noodle soup, and I'm baking her pumpkin cookies and things like that. So I would meet up with my sister. So my mom tried to do the whole counseling thing and fix her all this up. Not working, because my sister would be saying things like, gee, I need money for medication. And my mom would believe her, and then my mom would give her like $150. Okay, boop, that goes right to drugs, And so that's why. And then my dad would get mad at my mom, not knowing that my mom is probably victim of her own brain disease. We didn't know that at the time, Orest. So my dad's getting mad at my mom. My mom's trying to save her daughter, and call me up to pray for her. And so I would, I'd meet up with my sister, and I'd be like, she would tell me problems at her work and help her navigate. I'd try to help her navigate that. When she'd tell me, things like, oh, my employer is taking patients away from me. Oh, my employer is not giving me keys to the office. And I'm like, okay, red flags are going off in my brain. And I'm like, well, why? What's going on? And it would always be a blame game of something else. And in my mind, I'm thinking, if I were her employer, because I'm an employer, I run a small business, I'd do the same thing. And I was telling my sister that. And so, I mean, so that's kind of how that went. There was always an excuse for what was happening, for the crisis that was happening in her life, whether it was work related or financial related. They would get in car crashes. There were these things that would start, escalating more and more,
Sure.
And at each time, at each stage, we're there and we're trying to navigate it.
So you've done the confrontation. Your mom's doing the intervention that's not working. What happens next?
My dad's working through his anger, and we're all working through our own, anger, resentment, ashamed. And
Guilt.
meanwhile, my parents' house is getting broken into. When they would travel, there'd be these drug parties. I mean, it was just, it was not good. So it was really challenging to work through each of our own feelings that we're having towards the situation, and treating it, treating our own selves so we can be there for her. It's really hard to do when you feel like this is happening to you. It's really challenging to do. Eventually, I met with my parents and one of my sister's friends, and I talked with my dad. My dad and I were in business together for several years. I think I mentioned that we're both trial attorneys, and I was able to have like business discussions with him that would get him out of his anger and over the situation, to try to manage this what's in our life right now. And so we started coming up with techniques, like he's like, or tools, if you will. He's like, well, if we can get your sister on disability, or if we can get her to sign you over as her guardian or a power of attorney or things like that. And it was, and we thought that her husband at the time, was not a good influence. And so maybe getting a divorce and facilitating that. And so I would bring these things up whenever I would meet with my sister, different things about how we were there, and try to position her to navigate through what was going on. Eventually, I was able to invite my parents to participate in like a real intervention where we're all in this, like Team Kellyberry, here we go, and so we did a real live intervention where we had a professional interventionist come in and help us work with, and he was great because he was of my parents' vintage, and so he was really able, Orest, to mend that divide between my parents on why this happened, because they were each blaming each other that this happened. And the professional interventionist was just able to show my dad the vulnerability of my mother, and that's love of a daughter there, and that love of a daughter is going to present itself differently between a father and a mother. He was really, really good at that. Yeah. And that enabled my husband and I to step in as we can step in with our limits. My parents have their limits, each their own. And then my husband and I have ours. And then she has her lovely soul sister friends. They each wrote letters, and some of them showed up. And then our children wrote letters. And so we did a real live intervention. My dad would tell you it wasn't a success, and I would differ with him. So,
thank you for joining Dr. Orest and his incredible guest. Like what you heard and learned? Then be sure to do 3 things. 1, subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. 2, share this with someone who may need to hear it. 3, leave a review and rate this podcast. Opt in at www.thestandard.academy/magazine and get our free digital magazine with savings, articles, and deeper dives into cool controversy. Be the guy who takes action. Without action, you're not going to get the results you want. Thank you again, and make it a great day.